You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host, and welcome to this week's episode. We are joined by DJ Summers of the Common Sense Institute. He is the Director of Policy and Research, oversees the stages of CSI's fellows and research staff, coordinates with partners, iterates and analyzes projects, and breaks down findings for the public legislators and commercial leaders. Prior to CSI, DJ attended the University of Utah and Syracuse University. He worked as a journalist, investigator, and political researcher across the U.S. from Washington, D.C. to Alaska. DJ has a drive to understand complex truths and make them clear and accessible to the public and its leaders alike. DJ lives in Denver and is a classically trained pianist. He devotes his spare time to practicing and studying music, and when not at the piano bench, he has a regime of strength training, combat sports, and enjoys a good Colorado beer. We welcome him. Hey, DJ. It's been a hot minute.
Yeah, it has been a hot minute. It's been a not so hot minute because I haven't been on your show in the meantime, which is a bummer.
You are always welcome, always welcome. So, but today, CSI has put out a new report on homelessness. But I guess I want to back up just a little bit. How does this work in terms of what CSI, like, you have lots of different reports in lots of different areas, which is awesome. But when you have a topic that comes up, what do you do in terms of starting to research this and get the data?
Well, as far as homelessness goes, the best source of information is the PIT count. That's the point in time count. This is the count every year performed by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And it is performed all across the city. They have different, what they call continuum of care areas. And that's like a county or a metro area or a city, in some cases an entire state. And they'll do a count of how many people are sleeping in some place that isn't devoted to human shelter. They'll do a count of how many people are sleeping in shelters and in what kind of shelters. They'll do estimates of how many people have like a substance abuse problem. If that information is available, they'll count everything you would want to know about homeless individuals everywhere across the country. That's where we start with all of this because it's the best available comparative tool. Now, that has a kind of asterisk afterward because it's not exactly the most accurate. In most circumstances, homeless advocates, kind of think that it's inaccurate. They think that it's undercounting more often than not because it's only performed on one night. They get all the workers out on one night in January. They count as many people who are sleeping under overpasses and as many people who are sleeping in shelters as possible. And it doesn't account for a lot of the people who are out there. So there's a lot of underestimate that goes on with the PIT count. But that being said, it's the best available tool when you want to try to make comparisons because it's national data. You can compare cities to cities. You can compare states to states, counties to counties. So that's why we focus and most people focus on the PIT count because it's the widest set of data. It's the most comprehensive counting that we have in the country right now when we're talking about homelessness. Other areas might have their own counts that go higher than the PIT count, but they won't be comparable to another city. So we focus on that and focus on how that's changed in certain areas. We do all of the data analysis to just see what's happening, how it's changed in certain areas, which subsets of the homeless change in certain areas over certain times. That's the general basis for how we approach our homelessness study.
And where does that PIT count come from? Is that a federal program? Or who does that?
That's a federal program. It's administered by local people, but it's a federally run program from HUD, from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. They're the ones who spearhead that. They're the ones who train people on how to do it. And they're the ones who house all of that data on an annual basis. So all of that data is publicly available. You can get all the counts by state, by county, by continuum of care area, all the way back to, I think, 1999.
Mm,
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's
And
a great
and
data
is
set to use.
and that's free. So a normal
That's free.
human doesn't need to Quora to get that. It's free.
Exactly.
Okay.
The normal
Interesting.
human, they
Okay,
can,
but
I mean, you
but
got
it's
to dig a
one
little bit,
day.
but
Yeah, sure. What but it's one day's worth of data. Literally a like count day for schools.
yes, that's exactly
Okay.
what that is. And that is why homeless advocates, including many in the Denver metro area, the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, or the Metro Denver Homeless Initiative, they'll routinely criticize it for being an undercount. They'll say, look, we're probably dealing with anywhere between, maybe 5 to 10 times more homeless individuals in the state of Colorado at any given moment, because it's not counting how many people might be couch surfing at that time. It's not counting how many people you just didn't find who were sleeping on the street. It's not counting maybe some people who get missed in shelters, or people who were staying with relatives, people who were just out somewhere else uncountable at the time. When you do those estimates, you probably are getting a figure that's 5 or 10 times higher than what is included in the pit count. Uh, that's the available information, and unfortunately, there's only been a handful of people uh, to do additional counts, to do additional estimates over and above what the point in time count are. So we can't really use those to cross compare. We can't use them to compare how Colorado's doing to how Washington is doing, or how Arapahoe County is doing versus Douglas County. So that's the trouble, is that it is routinely criticized as being an undercount, and with some justification. But still, it's the best available tool that we have to measure across a nation of 330 million people.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and it does sound like the basic place to start, and that makes a lot of sense. So moving forward there, before we get into the nitty-gritty of the report, I would assume, and this is my maybe I have some bias, I don't know, that homelessness has an intricate relationship with substance abuse, but then maybe that's not the case, and especially with the current economic situation, that could be an entirely different set that I don't understand. So is there a background there that you can talk me through?
Homelessness does have a bunch of subsets, the subcategories of homelessness. That's one of the things that the pit count data is really good for. Because across all these different areas, across counties and states, in this continuum of care areas, these COCs, it will measure how many people have like a mental health problem, how many of them are veterans, how many of them have been victims of domestic violence, how many of them have a substance abuse problem, whether it's drugs or alcohol. And it'll give you a kind of comparative sectionality there, seeing how many people in the homeless community have certain problems. Because I mean, and that really is one of the big problems when it comes to homelessness abatement, is that you're not talking about a monolithic bunch of people. You're talking about a very broad section of people who find themselves without a home for one reason or another, and that might be for varying reasons. When we talk about homelessness as an urban issue in Denver, a lot of the times what people are talking about is the street homelessness that they see, people sleeping on park benches, or people who are visibly high in public spaces. That's a lot of the times what people talk about when they talk about homelessness, and that's what they have in their minds. And it is more expansive than just that. That's a huge component of it, but there's also people who don't actually make it to the street level. They are able to use city shelters for one reason or another. They're just fleeing their home, or maybe they were evicted, something like that. They don't have that same like street homelessness, visible street homelessness component to them. So it's a very broad swath that exists when we're talking about homelessness. That being said, a very significant portion of it is substance and alcohol related. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but it's something like a quarter or maybe a third of the Denver metro homeless who do have some kind of issue with substance abuse or alcohol problems, the same slice that has some kind of designated mental health problem as well. So there's a lot. It's not monolithic, but that subsection of substance abuse is sizable.
Right. Okay, so I guess the top question, which isn't really data driven, and you guys are very data driven and good at that, is homelessness a problem? Which I think, and I know the answer I'm assuming is yes, but maybe I get the answer to the question first.
I think the answer is yes. I mean, homelessness is a problem. In the Denver metro area, homelessness is a problem. It has driven a big chunk of the public discourse. A lot of decisions have been made around it. It's used up a lot of city resources. It's commanded a lot of city attention. And it is still a problem. It's a problem for several reasons. One, it's just a problem in terms of development. Downtown Denver needs to be back to where it was before COVID. It hasn't recovered very well. It's taken a lot of hits since COVID. It's not regaining a lot of the foot traffic that it had. There's a lot of empty buildings. There's a lot of uh, businesses closing down. It's just not the same economic structure that it was before COVID hit. And a big portion of that is if you can't get people to come downtown, it's not going to ever be that way again. Now, a lot of that's work traffic. Some of that is people who are in the remote work phase, which really kicked off in the early 2020s. But some of it is just visitor traffic. People don't come downtown as much because there might be a perception that it isn't as safe as it used to be. And homelessness is a really big part of that. So much so that the Denver mayor ran on a homelessness platform and has commanded a lot of city resources in trying to do something about it. Now, to that end, the Denver mayor's plan has coincided with some positive results. Some other ones maybe not so much. It's kind of a mixed bag that we're looking at. Progress within an otherwise uh, problematic story. There are more homeless in the Denver metro than there ever have been, and more homeless in Denver proper than there ever have been. It's an increase over 2024 in the number of homeless people.
Right. So let's dig into the report a little bit more. Tell me, and obviously if homelessness is a problem, then and the Denver mayor ran on this platform, what is working, what isn't working based on the data sets that you're seeing?
But like I said, there are more homeless people in the Denver metro and in Denver proper than there ever have been. It was an increase over last year. But there are more of them than ever who are sheltered. The number of unsheltered homeless, the number of people sleeping on the street is going down. It's a substantial reduction. It's almost half of what it was in 2023. So, visible street homelessness, people sleeping on the street, that is going down in Denver and in the Denver metro area as a consequence. A lot of that is probably related to the mayor's build out of shelter space. He spent a lot of money purchasing hotels and making them into shelter space for the homeless. Now, the other part of that is there are also more chronically homeless people than there ever have been as well. The number of chronically homeless people has been rising. That's the number of people who have been homeless off and on for a period of years. They've cycled in and out of shelters to street, shelter to street. They're just in that ecosystem more or less constantly for a period of years. The number of people in that state is also increasing. So it's kind of a mixed bag where the numbers are concerned. The numbers say that there are more homeless people than ever. On the bright side, fewer of them are sleeping in the street than have been recently. But it doesn't seem that there are fewer chronically homeless people getting out of the cycle of shelter space use and sleeping on the street. That's a big portion of what our homelessness policy fellow said. Our homelessness policy fellow is Dustin Zavanek. He is the former city councilman from Aurora. He's mayor pro tem, and he serves as our homelessness fellow. And a big item of his is how to approach the problem in a way that keeps people out of the cycle of dependency instead of just trying to put a roof on it one time and seeing if that does the trick. So it's a difference in approach that a lot of people have. That's the difference in approach between one shelter in Aurora or one shelter in San Antonio and some other shelters around the way. That is at the heart of the homelessness argument, is what exactly is going to get people out of the cycle of dependency. How hard does it need to be in order to access all of the resources that might be involved in that, and whether or not it's going to work in the long term. And a lot of reasonable people differ on how that might be accomplished. But I think most of them want to see fewer homelessness overall. They want to see less. They want to see less chronically homeless. They want to see people able to rise above and get back on their feet.
In terms of those that don't have substance abuse issues and that is not a factor. So you said that rough numbers that could be about a quarter. What about the other 3/4? And again, getting a roof over your head in a temporary sense is one solution to one part of the problem, but it's not the whole problem, because now we're talking about unemployment, we're talking about housing, lots of different aspects. And where do your reports from CSI connect with one another in terms of the bigger picture?
In terms of the bigger picture, our reports are difficult to connect because what we focus on is the number of homeless at the metro level, county level. We focus on the resources that have been spent. And we're trying to focus more on outcomes, on whether or not those plans are actually yielding that result of getting people, into a state of independence. That's mostly what we're trying to build up to, is trying to tie the dots. What exactly is the most common denominator, and what's the best possible way to approach it? I mean, our reports focus mostly on pit count data. They focus on the number of homeless. They focus on the kind of public resources that have been spent. I mean, that's mostly what our work has focused on right now, is just trying to get a hold of how much this has cost the state of Denver or the state of Colorado, versus how many homeless are still around, whether or not there's some tangible results here. And where we would like to go in the future, where we'd like to devote a little bit more energy, is into exactly that, trying to kind of tie it together, trying to see what works, trying to see where the results develop the most fruit. And that just comes with a little bit of time and hopefully a little bit of luck.
So, in terms of CSI's reports, you put out a report, let's say it's education, right? Can you do a 2.0, or do you update, do you go back from the beginning and relook at the data, or do you just update data based on the sources that were used?
It depends on what we're doing at the time. I mean, a lot of the time we are able to just do a 2.0. It's a normal update. We do that all the time with jobs and inflation numbers. We'll do it with city budgets or Department of Education spending, school district spending at the K to 12 level. We do a lot of that kind of stuff, where it's just plug and play, more or less. You're getting numbers, comparing them to the numbers that we had last year. But that's not always the case because the situation will develop from year to year and new funding sources are acquired over the course of a year and new initiatives are started over the course of a year. So we have to incorporate more into the update than originally was in our scope of research 2 years before. And that does happen with a lot of our work because situations are always moving, situations are always changing, especially at the city level, especially at the state level. You're always dealing with a new set of issues, a new set of budgetary crisis, or uh, a new set of context around which all of this public discourse takes place. So we try to put as much new information in as it needs, uh, while sticking to our original goal of just making sure that the numbers are right in the public dialogue.
And what would be the most challenging aspect in terms of, like, right now, the reason I'm asking that question is that we're talking about pit data, and then the 1 day a year count out of 364 more days, that it would be very different. So what is the most challenging in terms of reports and areas when you have those plug and play numbers in K through 12? Seems a little bit quote unquote easier, but like you say, the landscape is always changing. So what is the most challenging part, or which areas are reports more difficult to produce?
Um, that's a great question. I mean, they're always most difficult in situations that we're reporting something ongoing. We did analysis of what the city was spending on that border crisis that we had a few years ago, trying to tally up what they were spending on emergency response. Those numbers are always changing. Those numbers were always shifting. There were new sources of spending being identified. There were new sources of revenue that could possibly be identified. There were more people moving in. At the end of the day, we're not exactly a news service. We don't keep up with things to the day. So those are usually the more challenging ones for us to try to nail something down. We have to nail something down so that it's responsive to the public conversation and then build on it as often as there's a new thing to build on.
And with the reports related to homelessness, is there an ability to see trends that do work? Like we talked about, again, getting a roof over a person's head for a night is one thing, but changing a chronic condition of homelessness over long-term time is a different scenario. So how does that impact the reports in terms of looking at, okay, this tactic works versus that tactic that hasn't seen the results data wise?
Difficult to do that because you have to get into different shelter providers and different homelessness service providers and see what the operational differences are between how one does it and how another does it, and then see whether or not that yields some kind of result. And that's kind of difficult to do when you're talking about homelessness because homeless people are people and they are porous. They can move across city lines. They can appear in one place and then another. It's more difficult to track the kind of real world results, which is why we focus on it Denver metro wide, simply to see if the aggregate number of people in the area is going up or down and whether or not that can be assigned to one particular way, the dominant way of approaching the problem right now. Now, as more alternative visions come online, we'll probably have more data to see whether or not one approach is working better than another. And that's where we're probably going to focus some energy in the future. We've already done some of that because you can compare different cities. You can compare San Antonio to Denver. They have different approaches. Their aggregate numbers have moved in very different directions. Colorado Springs is another one. You can have there's slightly different approach in Colorado Springs than there is in Denver. Slightly different. It's not entirely different. Kind of in the same family, but that's generally where we try to focus on items. But in the absence of any more granular and responsive information, we kind of have to just do what we can with pit count available data.
Okay, so from here, what are the new horizons? What other reports can we be excited about coming out from CSI soon?
You just short circuited my brain. We have a million I mean, we do 2 reports every week, thereabouts. I mean, we will have something. 2 reports a week. That's about what we're clocking these days. That's what
Brilliant.
we like in order to stay on schedule. There's no shortage of things to talk about in Colorado, is the long and short of it. So we want to be across all areas. One report that we are excited about coming up is our report on higher education funding. A very, very big report that's coming out. It's had a lot of man hours behind it. Very excited about that one. The gist of it there is we're wondering how much the state spends on trying to produce degrees of value that we know are valuable in the workplace afterward, and what would happen if the state were to spend a little bit more in encouraging all of its public universities to give more of those kinds of degrees out to its graduates. What happens if we focus on and a little bit more purposefully. So very excited about that report. That one should be out in the next week or two.
Wonderful. So if people are interested in a particular subject and CSI has reports, you can just go to your website to look them up, correct?
You can go to our website. You can come around. We have a dozen different policy areas that we are working inside: healthcare, education, state budget, taxes and fees, crime, you name it. We're probably covering it. And they're all grouped. All of our previous studies, they're all grouped on our website. If you're curious about anything, you can go onto that website, cruise around until you see something that fits the bill.
Wonderful. Well, as always, DJ, it is so educational when you come and talk to us. So, as I said, you are always welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm always delighted to be here. I find it doesn't do us much good if I'm just sitting behind a computer looking at spreadsheets. You got to talk to people.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for your time, DJ. See you soon.
Thank you for having me, as always.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.